Now that we've looked at numerous ways to test and deploy our app, let's focus on the code. Let's start by looking through the app structure that was originally generated for us by the Ionic start command. The app folder is where you'll be spending most of your time when developing Ionic apps. The app.ts is the starting point for any Ionic 2 application. You can put an initialization code here. The pages folder is where you'll put the code for the screens you create. When I expand the home folder, you'll see I have 3 files: a TypeScript file, which is your Angular component, an HTML file, and a Sass file, which is optional. Here we can see home.html, and this is where I put the Ionic 2 Pluralsight message earlier that we customized. My TypeScript file, which is my component, right here is just pretty much empty with a constructor. And then I have my Sass file, currently no classes in here. In addition to the Sass files that are specific to a screen, we can see here that in the theme folder, we can also provide styling globally in our app. By default, Ionic 2 uses Sass instead of CSS. Of course, Sass compiles down to CSS. There are courses in the Pluralsight library dedicated to Sass if you want to learn more about this technology. For now, think of Sass as CSS+. Ionic goes through a compilation process and puts the results in the www folder. For example here, if I expand build and pages, the pages that we saw above get compiled and copied to this location. If we think of Ionic as a single page application, and we should, the index.html file here is the single page that contains the rest of our application. Specifically, the Ion app element that you see here contains our application, which is initially loaded from the app.ts file I showed earlier. There are a few key files in the root of the application structure as well that you should know about. The config.xml is the standard configuration file for Cordova applications. The gulp file contains some key build tasks that Ionic uses, including some of the commands you saw me run earlier using the Ionic command line tool. You are encouraged to modify this file if you have custom build tasks that you want to run as part of your development workflow. John Papa has a great Pluralsight course dedicated to gulp. The ionic.config.json file contains some basic config values for your Ionic app. The package.json file is the standard file Node uses to configure installed packages. Like any Node application, the Node modules folder is where the npm packages used by your application will be installed. There are also some files down here at the bottom to help you configure TypeScript. These work in conjunction with the typings folder, which contains any TypeScript definition files we might be using in our app. We'll look at this more closely later in the course. The resources folder contains media for such things like icons and splash screens. We'll also look at this more closely later. The plugins folder contains any native device plugins we might want to use in our app, such as the camera or geolocation. We'll cover this in depth in a later module. You already got a brief look at the platforms folder when I compiled the app for Android a little earlier. For the most part, you won't have to manually modify anything in this folder. Those are all the major components to know about for the project structure of an Ionic 2 application. We'll look at many of these areas more deeply as the course progresses.